From the birth of America to the truth about George Washington. Stay tuned to number 1 to find out about early colonial life. Number 10. The date of our birth. When I say to you, what is the birthday of America? You'll most certainly shout out July 4th, 1776. And you're right. And you're also wrong. For while it's true that the Declaration of Independence was approved by the Founding Fathers on that date, the actual vote for independence was done by the Continental Congress on July 2nd, 1776, which means that technically we're celebrating the act of independence 2 days late. Plus, there's also historical proof that not all the signatures were received until August of that same year. So if we're really being technical, the United States has several different birthdays depending on how you look at it. But wait, you cry out. What about all those historical pictures of Congress and the Founding Fathers all signing the document on July 4th? You know, like they say they did in National Treasure or Schoolhouse Rock? Well, they're right, and they're wrong. It's true that the document was signed by many people, including legendary figures like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and more. However, on July 4th, 1776, only 2 people signed it, one of them being John Hancock, who famously wrote it so big because he wanted to make sure that the signature could be seen by King George even without his reading glasses. The rest of the signatures? It came more of a as-available signing. Continental Congress notoriously had their members coming and going because of the state of the colonies at the time. But eventually, the signatures were all set and history took shape because of it. It's still fine to celebrate July 4th, just be cautious when you say it's America's birthday. Number 9. Battle of the Frogs. Let's talk about wars in America for a bit, okay? The first official war that came when the colonies were all set was the French Indian War, which took place from 1754 to 1763. This particular war set a lot of things in motion, and not exactly in a good way. However, it did keep the colonies alive, and that's what's important to many. However, in the middle of that war, in 1758, there was another war, a war so violent that the people of a local town were changed forever. This was the Battle of the Frogs. Never heard of it? I'm not surprised. It was actually a pretty small battle. And no, it's not called the Battle of the Frogs because of some landmark or town name. Rather, it's actually referencing a battle between frogs. Or more accurately, a war between frogs. This happened in what was then Windham, Connecticut. During the night on one summer, all was quiet, and then something happened. Noise came up from outside of their homes. Because this was in the middle of the French-Indian War, the people thought they were under attack. So they went and got their weapons and prepared themselves for battle. Following the noise, they went to where the action was, but to their shock, it wasn't Indians, or even French. It was frogs. These frogs were battling over water that was in the pond of the town. Now you might think, well, that's not exactly noteworthy. But you haven't heard the casualty count yet. Thousands of frogs lost their lives in this battle, all over some water. Can you honestly say you've heard of something like this happening before? Because the townspeople most certainly hadn't. And if they didn't have the bodies of the frogs to prove it, I doubt anyone would have believed them. Number 8. A bestseller. Before we talk about colonial literature, take a moment to like this video and join the Zero to Hero community by using the buttons below. When we judge a book nowadays, we often ask how well it's sold to the general public. We call these bestsellers. Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Twilight, 50 Shades of Grey, all were big hits in the modern age of books. So let me ask you this. What was the first bestseller ever in America? I'll give you a moment to think about it. The answer is Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Released in 1776, the pamphlet, yes, it wasn't even a full book, was bought and read by an enormous amount of people in colonial America. In fact, it's said that 1 in 3 Americans read the book, or at the very least, heard of it and knew of its contents. If you recall, Common Sense was a breakdown of why the colonies needed to separate from England and become their own country, noting that it would be best to be on their own and not to be governed by a country and a king an ocean away. This was one of the sparks that truly helped the American Revolution, as people were starting to wonder if they should have a revolution, and as for the Continental Congress, them being besieged by their own people to propose revolution was the shove they needed to get things rolling. And they did. And the rest is history. Number 7. The face of a father. One of the things that is to be praised about the early colonies is that they knew how to respect and honor the men and women who helped the country grow. Oftentimes, they made portraits of the people who helped shape the early world, and one of these people was, or at least should have been, Caesar Rodney. Who is he? Well, he was the founding father of Delaware and was very respected for his role in both the colonies and the Revolution. Here's the thing. On the state quarter for Delaware, you'll find a picture of Rodney, one of him riding a horse. Which is important, and I'll get to that soon. But the thing is, historians really don't know what Rodney looked like. Why? Well, he had a form of face cancer, one that made his face, not nice to look at. Thus, he kept his face covered at all times, and wouldn't allow a picture of him to be made for fair reasons. But when the time had come to sign the Declaration of Independence, Rodney jumped on that horse and rode 80 miles straight in order to sign it. History honored him, even though we don't know his true face. Number 6. Power in Parliament. There were many reasons why the colonies went and rebelled against England. They were taxed heavily, as history likes to show, but there was much more base and subtle reason for their rebellion: representation. You see, because of how the colonies were viewed in the eyes of England, they didn't have a lot of rights and power, especially when it came to the biggest power in England. No, not the king, but Parliament. There were no Americans on the Parliament floor, and people were furious about it. Because of this lack of representation, the people of the colonies had no way of choosing who would be put into key positions in the various states. This got many angry and was one of the leading reasons behind the Revolution. Number 5. Love and marriage. There are many things we take for granted in this modern age, and one of them is the love we are able to share with others. In colonial times, marriage was common. In fact, it was very common, but not in the way you might expect. You see, due to disease, war, accidents, and other things, there was actually a pretty high mortality rate. And due to this, marriages often had a lifespan of only about 12 years, which is still a long time, but nothing like we have now in most cases. Because of this, it was actually common practice to get remarried should a spouse pass away, due to the living conditions of the world and how hard it was to make a living at times. But it doesn't end there. You see, the cost of a marriage license back then was very expensive, so a legal marriage was actually a bit hard to come by. So the people worked around it by putting ads in the paper, cementing their relationship. Ain't love grand? Number 4. An American kind of army. Let me ask you this. When the Continental Army fought the British, what was the army comprised of? Your gut reaction might be to say, well, English or natural-born colonists. And you would be right, but that's only one part of the story. Historians have found that when it comes down to it, there were a lot of nationalities fighting the English to free America, and not just the ones you'd expect. Irish and German parties helped the soon-to-be Americans in a big way, for they had no love for England. Plus, there were indeed African Americans who were in the army. Yes, slavery was still going on at the time, but there were freed slaves who happily fought for the colonies, and some had even run away from English masters so that they could fight for their potential freedom. In the end, it was an army that America would later be known for, as it was a mix of many nations fighting for freedom above all else. Number 3. The loss of children. As noted earlier, the mortality rate in the colonies was incredibly high, and not just when it came to the parents, but also the children. Back in the early colonial days, medicine was anything but advanced, and the simplest of injuries could cause infection, disease, and eventually mortality. Just making it out of the first year of life was considered a great accomplishment, and that's sad given where we are with technology and medicine in the modern age. Still, it happened, and quite a bit. On average, a woman would have between 7 to 10 children, not because she wanted that many, but because there was such a high chance that many of them would not survive. Another big reason for the loss of children was accident, such as working on the farm and getting hurt doing a mundane task. But then again, because of the way of medicine back then, it was just their way of life. If you're curious why there's not a line of George Washington, it's because all of his children passed away in some form or another. He and his wife Martha outlived them all. Number 2. Vive la France. It is a well-known fact that the French were instrumental in the victory of independence of America. Benjamin Franklin was our official ambassador and used his cunning and guile to win more and more support from the French. But one thing that is often glossed over is that at the final battle of the Revolutionary War, Yorktown, there was a large garrison of French troops on the ground. That's right, they were supporting us on land as well as with naval ships. And because of that, historians say that there were more French soldiers at Yorktown than there were Americans. Some even say 2-to-1 in favor of the French. Number 1. The lies of George Washington. It's not uncommon for history to lie about certain facts or traits about legendary people and figures. When it comes to George Washington, he has numerous stories about him that are downright lies, which is ironic because he's known to have been a great truth teller. For example, the story about him and the cherry tree? Yeah, that's fake. Or how about the portrait of him standing on a boat as it crossed the Delaware? He would never have done that, as it would have stood out to any potential sentries that were guarding the barracks they were about to raid. And then there's the portrait of him kneeling in prayer, asking for guidance from God at Valley Forge. That didn't happen either, as apparently George Washington was not religious in any way. Just goes to show, while history does get many things right, it exaggerates a bit on others. What do you think about these facts about early colonial life? Let us know in the comments below and take care.